onboarding strategies for engineers. I'm super excited to be here and do this event with Maven. I want to do 20 minutes of very high density, high value content that you can walk away from and apply immediately. And then I'll stick around after that for any questions you all have. Okay, so my background is I have been an engineer in California, in Silicon Valley, my whole career. Since I went to college out here, I went to Stanford, and then I just have been working at different companies since then. So this is a picture from 2017, August, and I just joined Facebook. And of course, as any new Facebook employee does, or Meta employee is what they call them now, you take a picture in front of the Facebook wall, which is like a literal wall in many of the buildings on campus in Menlo Park. And you get a picture there. And so you can tell I'm smiling, right? But behind that smile, I was actually very, very anxious. I was super nervous. And I'll tell you why. I had about a bit more than 3 years of experience at that point in my career. I was a mid-level engineer at Pinterest right before I joined Meta or Facebook. And I did well on the interview. I did a lot of preparation. I did well. And I knew people at Facebook who could advocate for me. I got up-leveled. So I was a mid-level engineer at Pinterest, and then I got a senior engineer offer at Facebook. And that freaked me out. I was like, okay, I'm going to do it. I mean, why would I say no to that? It's a huge opportunity, and I got paid a lot more. But I was super, super nervous. I felt like there's no way I'll be able to survive. You know, the classic imposter syndrome that I'm sure all of you have felt. So I don't know if you can tell if I look nervous in this picture or not, but I was like super nervous. So the first 3 months in the job, I was really nervous. And I think that one of the things that I did well, and I think I do well to this day, is that I asked for help. I asked a lot of people for a lot of help, and I asked for feedback. And those relationships that you form at the beginning of any new job, any new team, are so important to how you end up performing on the team. And so I'll just give you a concrete example here. One of the first people I interacted with at Facebook was someone named Alex. And I had no idea how to do onboarding because we were doing this hardware thing. It was much more involved than like normal software development at like building the IG app or the Big Blue, the Facebook app at Facebook, because we were actually doing stuff with hardware. You had to flash the device. And so Alex gave me like his own custom onboarding guide, which is super helpful. And we worked together for a few months before he ended up switching teams. And that person, Alex, became my co-founder 5 years later. So I'm not promising that, you're going to find your future co-founder in the first week in the job, but that happened for me. And I think a lot of it was not only because of Alex's kindness and just trying to help me out, but also being willing to put yourself out there. And I'm going to provide you a really practical way of how you can make that more algorithmic. So I'll tell you like how I would suggest you go about doing that. So I think the takeaway here, though, is that I was really nervous. I had a lot of imposter syndrome. But I think the thing I did well is that I realized that I can ask questions, because when you're new to a company, when you're new to a particular environment, you have a superpower by the fact that you are new. So think of yourself like you are Mario with the invincibility star in Mario Kart, or these video games, and no one can really hurt you, right? So you can do things, you can ask questions, you can act in a way that would be weird or inappropriate a year into the job. You can do that now when you're new. So for example, you can say, hey, what do you do here? What is it that you actually work on, right? I mean, if you wait a year or two before you ask someone like a tech lead or some random engineer on the team, it might be kind of insulting, or it's like, why are you asking me that? But when you're brand new, you can totally do that. It's not an issue. Like, you're just curious about how the team works. Another thing is that you're not expected to have impact immediately, right? No good company is going to require you to ship something in the first week or first month. Facebook is famous for having a 6-week boot camp where you just learn for 6 weeks. And most companies are not Facebook. They're not going to be that generous. But there is going to be time allocated for you to ramp up culturally and ramp up in terms of the tech stack. So how do we think about taking our newness, our ability to look at things from a different perspective and turn that into a strength rather than a weakness. So one thing I want to offer all of you is something that I call the Taro expertise theory. Okay. And the idea here is that you can very quickly, I would say within 2 or 3 months, you can become the most knowledgeable person on the team more than anyone, as long as you vary a certain set of parameters, right? So one is within a group of people P. Second is within a certain domain D. And then third is within a certain time T. Okay, so I call this the Taro expertise theory because I want to make it fancy. But the idea is that like when you enter into a team, everyone on the team, everyone in the company is like the blind man touching their part of the elephant. You might have heard of this analogy to a code base as like blind man touching an elephant, right? The people get so ingrained in their part of the elephant, they can touch their surface area, but they don't really have that holistic view that a new person might be able to have. And so my claim with this theory is that you can become more knowledgeable than anyone and have tons of unique value if you are thoughtful about these parameters. So people is like a team of 10. Domain is like the build system. And then T is a week. And then P and D are green because you want those to be as large as possible. And then T is in red because you want that to be as small as possible. So for example, if within 1 week, you know more about the whole mobile app, the Android app at Facebook, that would be amazing, right? Like you literally among 50,000 engineers, you know more about the Android millions of lines of code base than anyone at the company. I guarantee you're going to get promoted and become like a engineering fellow within a few months, right? And that's hard to do, right? So a more practical example, and this actually happened on the team, is that when I was working on this team called Portal at Facebook, there was a new engineer who came in and she read the documentation for core Facebook, which is, their way they operated was a little different from how we operated in Portal. And so she read the documentation and she realized, hey, there's this new command line utility that the DevX team, the developer experience team, they created called Jellyfish. And that was the recommended way that you submit code now for review, as opposed to this command line tool with Mercurial that we were using. And so just the fact that she was able to read that documentation and introduce it to us, and she knew more about Jellyfish, this new tool, than anyone on the team, because we were so heads down on what we were doing day to day. So within our team of 15 people on Portal, within a week, she knew more about Jellyfish, this new system, than anyone. And immediately she gained a ton of respect and a ton of accolades because of the value she provided immediately. So how do we do this, right? How can you now in the next week or month or whatever time frame you decide, how can you become the expert? And that is where I want to put forward this idea of talk and observe. Okay, so talk and observe. I've talked to hundreds of engineers through Taro, and this is the thing I picked to present to all of you because I've heard again and again that this is the idea or framework that has changed how people view their onboarding period at the company. Okay, so talk and observe is actually very simple. It's a framework which has 2 parts. First, you talk to people, and then second, you observe what they do. And that's why it's called talk and observe. And I'm going to give you some details on how to make sure you do that effectively. The first part is called talk. Okay, so the idea here is I want you, as you can expect, a really good way to ramp up and understand what's happening if you're new is I want you to go talk to people. So talk to your tech lead, talk to the coworkers on the team, obviously talk to your manager. I would recommend also talking to people who are not on your team and people who are not in your function. So most people here, you're going to be engineers. So you should definitely go talk to a designer, PM, copywriter, someone like that. And then here's what you should ask. I have a list here of 4 things you should be thoughtful about asking. One is, what are you working on in terms of the next week or next quarter? What are the top things that you're thinking about or working on? What are the problems that you're encountering, right? Where do you spend your time? How much of it is in code review? How much of it is in meetings? How much of it is in planning? And then at the end, make sure you ask who else you should talk to, right? So I would actually recommend writing down whatever intel you gather number one, I think it makes sure you don't forget anything. And number two, when you write things down, it shows people that you care. One way to make this a bit more concrete is Andrew Bosworth. If you all have heard of Andrew Bosworth before, can I get a thumbs up in the chat? I'm sure many of you have heard of him. He's the current CTO at Facebook, and he used to be like a VP in my org when I was working there. And so he basically formalized what I just described into something called the career cold start algorithm. And the idea here is that you take 30 minutes to schedule time with people, and you ask for the first 25 minutes, just ask them, tell me everything I should know. And then you only stop them if there's an acronym or something else you don't understand. For the next 3 minutes, you ask what the biggest challenge is, like what is the big thing that will prevent us from reaching our goal. And then finally, you ask, who else should I talk to? And if you do that, and you do that repeatedly with, I would say a good benchmark is within the first 2 weeks, you should schedule one-on-ones with 10 people. It's like a very rough heuristic. So if you do that with 10 people, I think that you'll get a really good idea of who are the people on the team. They'll know you. And also, very critically, when you talk to enough people, you'll start to get a power map of the organization. And what that means is you're going to find that the same names come up again and again and again when you ask that last question of who else should I talk to? And they'll say, oh, go talk to Mary. And then they'll also say, go talk to Mary. And then another person will say, oh, you should definitely go talk to Mary. She knows a lot about this system. So now, obviously, Mary is a very important person. And that is either a good thing in the sense that you can befriend her and like she can be an advocate for you, or she also has the ability to block whatever you're working on. And so having that understanding of the political landscape, especially in big tech, is super important to figure out who actually does the work and who do people respect. Okay, that was the talk part. And I think, for the most part, people already intuitively understand the idea that, yeah, when you join a team, a big part of how you onboard is talk to people. This part, the observation part, is much less understood, or it's applied much less. And this is where you can get a lot of benefit. So the idea here is that I want you to observe or stalk all of your teammates to figure out how are they actually spending their time. So here are 4 different things you can do that I would recommend for every single person on your immediate team, and also key people on other teams like tech leads or managers, etc. So as engineers, one of the primary markers of success or progress is code. So I want you to look at what are the code contributions of a particular person on the team. And you should break that down into code contributions that they've authored, like how many commits are they actually writing, how much code are they writing per day. And second, how much are they reviewing code, right? So typically a more junior engineer will write a lot more code. And then as you become more and more senior, usually you start to shift into reviewing mode because you want to basically unblock. You're like the linchpin who's unblocking 10 other people to do their work. You're not actually doing the work as much. You're the multiplier. And so that can give you a really good hint that, okay, this is a person who reviews a lot of code. I want to make sure I understand what feedback they've given on other people. And then I want to proactively address that. So when I put out my code review, I'll have a much easier time getting their approval, or at least learning from them. The other thing that this will show you is what are the norms at your company. So I've worked at 3 different companies now. I worked at a startup where I was a founding engineer. I worked at Pinterest, and I've worked at Meta. These are companies where I've worked full time. And I'll tell you, the culture around code review is wildly different. At Facebook, it was, you've heard that saying, move fast and break things. So as long as you got one person to approve your diff or your code review, you could land it. At Pinterest, they were a lot more defensive. So they actually had this system where if you touched a particular code file, then you needed someone who was an approved reviewer of that module or file to give you a LGTM, like a green check mark. And so you would often need to get 2, 3, even 4 reviewers before you could land code. And so you would only learn that if you can actually look at other people's code review, right? So then when you do your own code, you're much more prepared for, okay, here's the amount of time it'll take, and here is who I need to get approval from. And then the startup that I worked at, there was no code review. You write code and you push it, right? So that's a very important thing to understand, so you know what to expect or not expect when you're joining a company. Another big thing is design documents, right? Uh, when you're embarking on a big feature or a big project, there will usually be some sort of documentation about what is the plan, who's doing what are the milestones. So first of all, read that, and that's going to be helpful for you to understand the architecture of the project, but also look at the meta around that design document in the sense of, hey, this is someone like this company or this team puts a lot of time and effort into design documents. Every single thing is thought through. Or it's, hey, it's like a half-page document about a high-level 3-month plan, and they're just going for it. Right? There's two very different approaches to planning your work. There's not a right answer, but you need to understand what that is for your team that you're joining. Active experiments. A really big thing at Facebook is if you're going to ship something, you have to prove it. Prove that there's a stat sig benefit to the user or engagement. And so look at the experiments and figure out, are they running a bunch of experiments, and how much documentation is there behind them, and what is like the hypothesis, like how thought through is that? And then calendar. You'll be surprised how much data or information you can gather from a calendar block. At Pinterest, the calendars were, in retrospect, too open. So like by default, as a new employee, your calendar, anyone could like type your name into Google Calendar, which is what we were using, and they could see every meeting you had that day. I actually want you to try this. Like literally after this meeting, after this talk is done, if you're working at a company right now, go into Google Calendar or Outlook or whatever system you have and figure out how much visibility do you have on your colleague's calendar. At Pinterest, not only could I see when they had a meeting and when they didn't have a meeting, I could tell you the title of that meeting. So it's like John and Mary meeting for a one-on-one. Okay, now I know that these two people talk. And then I would also occasionally be able to see the contents of the meeting, like the agenda, which is like, honestly, I probably shouldn't have had. Like people at Pinterest should not have had access to that. But you can get so much good intel by saying, wow, John and Mary, here's what their agenda items are. It's in the body of the calendar invite, and they're meeting every 2 weeks. Okay, wow, that's actually good to know. Here's like how my team relates to this other team, because I know that these two tech leads are talking. At Facebook, it was like a little bit more closed down. Like I think that you could see when people were busy or free, but you couldn't see the contents of the calendar. But the point is that I want you to just look at what is the breakdown of how people spend their time. So if you look at an engineer's calendar and they have tons and tons of meetings, that could educate you about what is their role on the team compared to someone who has no meetings and they have a lot of deep focused time for coding, right? The way these two engineers operate is going to be different. And so if your goal is to get promoted, what I want you to do is go look at the top engineers on your team. And the most obvious path for your growth and your promotion is to emulate their working style. And so if you look at their calendar and they have, 1 meeting per day, and you look at your calendar and somehow you already have like 5 or 6 meetings per day, I am skeptical of your path to growing, because like you're not following the norms or like the accepted ways of this team to grow and to mature in the same way that you already have a template for, right? So if you get good at this and you understand the internal tooling, then within 10 minutes, you can run through all 4 of these bullet points for every person on the team. And there's a huge benefit to that. Number one is at Facebook, I got pretty good at this. Like anyone who I was meeting, for example, let's say I was like trying to launch an experiment and I need to get an approval or I need to get feedback from this random team who I haven't worked with. What I will do is I will go and find the point of contact, the POC, and I will run this stalking algorithm on them. And within 10 minutes, I could tell you with a high degree of confidence what level were they and what were the things that they really cared about in terms of feedback or blocking experiments or blocking code. And I would make sure when I come into that meeting, I had a really good answer to whatever I thought they might object to, because I researched them thoroughly. So this observation allows you to, number one, ask better questions. Number two, it allows you to identify opportunities or inefficiencies. So if you notice everyone on the team has like this weird, I don't know, like calendar block, which is like disrupting deep focus time because you looked at everyone's calendar, you can call that out and say, hey, I don't know why we're doing this. Like, could we maybe shift this meeting to another day so we have a no meeting day? Like oftentimes there are very simple wins that you can achieve if you just do this observation technique. And then finally, a huge part of this observation is that you're able to adapt culturally to the team, right? So things like code review or project planning, or how many meetings do you set up on a given day, or how quickly do you set up a meeting? All that will differ company to company and even team to team. Like Facebook, Google, Microsoft, they're so big now that you can kind of view them as separate companies within one larger company. And so the norms within the WhatsApp division is actually quite different compared to the cultural norms within Instagram. And so you have to be aware of that to make sure that you are not going to be causing unnecessary friction. Okay, so that is the talk and observe framework. And the reason I link the two is because I want you to talk to people when you're joining the team. The first 2 weeks on the team, talk to at least 10 people. So you figure out their priorities, their problems, their time spent. And then the magical thing is that when you do that, then it'll give you more color on when you actually do the observation and you look at their work, you can kind of back it up and say, hey, they say that project A is their priority, but actually when I look at their code contribution, they're spending most of their time on project B. Why is that? There's something that's going wrong here. And I wonder if I could help out. Like it immediately gives you ideas for impact. So when you look at their code, their design, their experiments, now when you talk to them again, you have ammunition. You have a lot more data to go in and say, hey, I noticed this is happening. Can I help out? Or I wonder if we've thought about approaching it this way, because I noticed that, this project document you put together has this potential issue. Can we talk about it? Right. So you go into the meeting appearing a lot more thought through and a lot smarter. So that's why I call it talk and observe, because these two things are very, very interlinked. Okay. So that was all I had. For the next 6 minutes or so, I would love to take questions. And I think you all should be able to unmute. So the way I'd like to do this is you can just raise your hand, and then I can call on you and I'll see if I can help out. And if I don't have time, I'd love to connect with all of you either on LinkedIn or YouTube, or, I have Taro is like my baby. So would love for all of you to figure out a way to get in touch, and I'd love to help out. Okay. The one thing I'll end on is I'm doing a course. So I'm doing this in collaboration with Maven. And so Maven had this idea to do to basically share a preview of what might be in the course. So if you thought this was valuable, then I would love for you to check out the Maven course I'm teaching starting in June. And this is a little bit different. This is the third time I'm doing this cohort. I'm doing it over one weekend. So I think it'll actually hopefully be simpler for all of you if you're joining. And also just one weekend, commit to it, walk away with really practical advice on how you get promoted, in particular for the senior level to the staff level.